When we choose where to live, many of us dream of finding a peaceful space away from the chaos of city life, free from noisy neighbors and restrictive rules. A quiet rural area with wide open spaces to enjoy the freedom of solitude, that's the dream for many. But what happens when that dream turns into a nightmare, simply because of one unbearable neighbor? The kind of neighbor who wants to impose their will on everyone else, even if they have no right to do so. This is where the story takes a sharp turn, and it's one that's both frustrating and strangely entertaining. Our story begins with a man who moves out to a remote area, hoping for peace and quiet, away from the hustle and bustle of city life. He believes he will finally find a life of tranquility, only to be confronted by someone who would make his life miserable. Enter Karen, a character who embodies the type of person who cannot mind their own business, constantly trying to assert control over others, even when they have no authority to do so. The first time he meets Karen, he has no idea how much his life will be disrupted by her actions. When he pulls into his driveway, Karen appears, clipboard in hand, with a scowl that could freeze anyone in their tracks. She begins to impose her so-called rules, declaring that his driveway and property fall under the jurisdiction of the HOA, a claim he quickly dismisses, knowing full well his property is private. What should have been a simple conversation turns into the beginning of an ongoing battle for control. But this isn't just about an unreasonable neighbor who loves to play by their own rules. It's about what happens when someone takes it too far. Instead of letting the disagreement slide, Karen escalates the situation in a way that no one could have predicted. She installs spike strips on the homeowner's driveway. Not only is this a bizarrely petty act, but it's also illegal and dangerous. This story brings up some key questions. Are Karen's rules really justified? And how should we react when confronted by individuals who feel entitled to impose their own will? Should we stay silent, or should we take a stand against actions that infringe on our rights? The following unfolds not just as a tale of two neighbors at odds, but as a powerful lesson on the abuse of power and how to protect what's rightfully ours. Let's dive into this dramatic story and see how one man fought back, made the right choices, and ultimately turned the tables on his relentless neighbor. What began as a small disagreement between two neighbors quickly spiraled into an all-out battle. The man, let's call him Jack, had just moved to this quiet rural area, eager to escape the hustle and bustle of city life. He wanted peace, freedom, and a bit of privacy. But, as he soon discovered, nothing is ever as peaceful as it seems, especially when a neighbor like Karen is involved. After Karen's initial confrontation, Jack thought the matter would simply die down. After all, his driveway was on his private property, and there was no reason why anyone, especially an outsider like Karen, should be imposing rules on him. He had every right to come and go as he pleased. But it wasn't long before Jack realized that Karen wasn't the type to let go of things so easily. The next morning, as Jack walked outside to grab his morning coffee, something caught his eye. His truck sat in the driveway just as it had the day before. But a few feet down the road, Jack noticed something that made his blood run cold. Metal spike strips sticking out from the gravel. At first, he thought it might be a mistake. Maybe some road work was happening. But no, these were deliberate, professional-grade tire shredders, the kind you might see used by law enforcement to stop high-speed chases. They were bolted straight into the ground on his own private driveway. Jack stood there dumbfounded. This wasn't just petty HOA nonsense. This was outright illegal. The spikes weren't just an inconvenience. They were a serious safety hazard. What if an emergency vehicle had to get through? What if someone accidentally drove over them? His frustration boiled over. He quickly snapped photos from every angle, making sure to capture the severity of the damage and the obvious intent behind it. Karen had crossed a line, and Jack wasn't about to let her get away with it. With the evidence in hand, Jack stormed over to Karen's house. He knocked on her door with a sense of purpose, ready to put an end to this madness. When Karen answered, her face was a picture of smug satisfaction, as if she had all the time in the world to enjoy her petty victory. "Are you out of your mind?" Jack shouted, pointing back at the driveway. "You've put spike strips in front of my house." Karen took a sip of her coffee and smiled, unfazed by the confrontation. "Well, I did warn you," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. The audacity of her response left Jack speechless for a moment, but his anger quickly surged again. "This is criminal damage to property. Not to mention it's dangerous. What if an emergency vehicle needs to get through here?" Karen shrugged, as if she were completely justified in her actions. "Rules are rules. If you have an issue, take it up with the HOA board," she said dismissively. Jack clenched his fists, holding back the urge to explode. He wasn't about to let this go. Before he could say another word, he snapped even more pictures, ensuring he had detailed documentation of the damage, not just the spike strips, but how they were bolted into the ground, showing that this wasn't just some prank or mistake. This was an intentional act of sabotage. As he prepared to leave, he made one quick phone call, and this is where the game began to change. He wasn't just going to play by Karen's rules. He had a lawyer on speed dial. Jack's lawyer, Matt, was a no-nonsense professional who had seen it all. When Jack explained what had happened and sent him the photos, Matt's response was immediate. "You've got her, Jack. She's done. This is property damage, reckless endangerment, and illegal road obstruction. Let me handle it." The next day, Jack had a formal letter delivered to Karen, making it clear that this wasn't just an HOA issue. It was a lawsuit waiting to happen. By the time Jack returned home, he found Karen standing outside, pulling the spike strips out of the ground, fuming and grumbling under her breath. But Jack knew this wasn't the end. Karen had made a mistake, and he was ready to make her pay for it. As Jack stood back and watched Karen struggle to remove the spikes, he thought the situation might finally be over. But he underestimated Karen's determination and the level of pettiness she was capable of. That night, Jack heard a loud bang from outside. He grabbed a flashlight, walked out onto his porch, and saw something that made his stomach drop. The spike strips were back. Not only had Karen reinstalled them, but this time, she had reinforced them with concrete. The sheer audacity of it was staggering. She had gone from a simple act of annoyance to full-on sabotage, and now the situation was even more dangerous than before. Jack was stunned. This woman wasn't just being unreasonable. She was actively making things worse, putting people at risk, and escalating the situation. But Jack wasn't about to let her have the final word. He immediately called Matt again, explaining what had happened. Matt's response was simple. "This is now a legal matter. We're going to court." The next morning, Jack woke up to see Karen standing at the edge of his property, arms crossed, watching him with a smug look. She wasn't even pretending anymore. She had no intention of backing down. The spike strips were still concreted into the ground, and she was waiting for Jack's reaction. But Jack was ready. He walked straight up to her, making it clear that he wasn't going to stand for her nonsense any longer. "Karen, this is private property. You can't just keep sabotaging my driveway," he said firmly. Karen smirked. "I warned you. Community rules apply to everyone. The board voted on this. You can't just use our roads without permission." Jack shook his head. "I don't need permission from you or your HOA. This is my land, and you and your club have no authority here." He pulled out his phone, already having had enough of her antics. "You want to keep this up? Fine. But maybe it's time someone bigger than me gets involved." Karen's smile faltered for the first time. "Oh?" "And who exactly do you think will stop me?" Jack grinned. "You're about to find out." Within the hour, Matt arrived with a sheriff's deputy in tow, and Karen's smug expression vanished the moment she saw the uniform. The sheriff's deputy took one look at the spike strips and began his questioning. "Excuse me, ma'am," the deputy said. "We've received a complaint about illegal road hazards on private property. Care to explain?" At that moment, Karen realized that the situation had spiraled out of her control. The moment Karen saw the deputy, she stiffened, her self-satisfied smirk quickly replaced by a look of sheer panic. The deputy's authority was undeniable, and with the legal documents in Matt's hand, there was no room for negotiation. "Ma'am," the deputy began, his voice firm and professional, "I need you to remove those strips immediately or we will have to escalate this matter." He turned to Matt. "This is criminal damage, and it's a public safety hazard. She's in violation of the law." Karen stammered. "But I was just—" Matt cut her off, holding up the papers. "No, Karen. You weren't just enforcing community standards. You were committing a crime. This is a lawsuit waiting to happen, and if you don't comply, it could lead to criminal charges." The deputy didn't wait for Karen to protest further. "Failure to comply will result in hefty fines, a lawsuit, and possible arrest. We're not leaving here without those spike strips being removed." Karen, for the first time, looked like she was grasping the severity of the situation. She hesitated, her eyes darting around for an escape. But there was no way out. Under the watchful eye of the deputy, Karen begrudgingly began to dig up the spike strips. It was a humiliating process for her. Not only was she forced to remove the very things she had spent so much time putting in place, but she was doing it in front of neighbors who had come out to witness her downfall. They whispered among themselves, watching as the woman who had once acted as if she owned the neighborhood struggled to undo her own mess. Jack stood back, arms crossed, silently watching the spectacle unfold. It was a moment of pure satisfaction. Not only had he protected his property, but Karen had been forced to face the consequences of her actions. But Jack knew Karen wasn't going to take this defeat lying down. As soon as she had finished removing the strips, Jack could see the fury in her eyes. It was only a matter of time before she retaliated. That evening, Jack was sitting on his porch, enjoying the rare peace of a quiet evening, when he noticed Karen storming down the street. She was carrying her clipboard again, and her face was twisted in rage. Jack knew exactly what she was up to. She was gathering signatures, trying to rally support from the neighbors for a cause that only she believed in. The next morning, Jack awoke to find a note slipped under his door. It was an emergency HOA meeting notice. The meeting hall was packed with people, all there because Karen had convinced them that Jack was a threat to the community. She stood at the front, her voice filled with fury as she tried to make her case. "He has no respect for our rules," she cried, flipping through papers with an air of authority. "He's brought in lawyers and law enforcement to bully us. If we let this go, what's next? Chaos." Jack rolled his eyes. He wasn't the one causing chaos, Karen was. But this time, she wasn't going to win. The HOA president spoke up, his voice calm but firm. "Karen," he said slowly, "are you seriously suggesting that you are the victim here? After illegally installing spike strips on someone's driveway." Karen's face twisted in disbelief. She was used to getting her way, but not today. A neighbor cut in. "He lives here. You're the one who's been abusing your power, Karen. We're tired of it." The president continued, "And frankly, this is the last straw. Your actions have put everyone in this neighborhood at risk. You've lost all support." Karen stood there, stunned. For the first time, she was completely alone. The people she had tried to control, the residents she had hoped would back her up, were all turning their backs on her. By the end of the meeting, Karen was stripped of all HOA authority. No more clipboard, no more power, no more fines. She was done. But Karen wasn't finished just yet. That night, Jack heard shouting outside again. He stepped onto his porch, and there she was, standing in the middle of the street, yelling at the neighbors. Her face was contorted with rage as she screamed about betrayal, how she had done so much for the neighborhood, and how the residents were turning against her. One of the neighbors, an older man named Frank, calmly shook his head. "Karen, you've made this place miserable for years. We're done with you." Jack couldn't help but smile at Frank's words. But the smile quickly faded when he went inside and discovered something alarming. His truck was gone. His heart sank. His truck, the one thing he had been protecting, had vanished from his driveway. Panic set in as he ran to check his security cameras. There it was, in the dead of night. Karen had orchestrated the theft of his truck. He watched in disbelief as she stood beside a tow truck, smirking, as his vehicle was hauled away. Jack wasn't about to let her get away with this. He immediately called the sheriff's office and reported the theft. "I know exactly who took it," he said calmly. "It was Karen." Within minutes, the sheriff's deputy arrived at Jack's house. Together, they went to a private impound lot where the truck had been taken. Sure enough, there it was. After presenting the evidence, the impound lot owner reluctantly released the truck without a fee, and Jack knew that this time, Karen had crossed a line she couldn't undo. It didn't take long for Jack and the deputy to head straight to Karen's house. The moment Karen opened the door and saw the deputy standing there, her face drained of color. "Karen," the deputy said, "we need to talk." Jack stepped forward, holding up his phone and playing the footage of Karen standing next to the tow truck taking his vehicle. "You stole my truck, Karen. That's grand theft." Karen's face twisted in shock as she tried to come up with an excuse, but there was no way out. The evidence was clear. The deputy wasted no time. "Karen, you're under arrest for vehicle theft. Turn around." Jack watched, arms crossed, as Karen was led away in cuffs. It was a moment of pure vindication. After everything she had put him and the neighborhood through, she was finally paying the price for her actions. The whole neighborhood watched as Karen was led to the police car, her face red with humiliation. The once feared HOA Karen had finally been brought down, and Jack couldn't have been happier. Karen may have lost her position, but her behavior served as a stark reminder of the lengths some people will go to for control and power. However, in the end, the message is clear. No one is above the law, and standing up for what's right, no matter how difficult, is the best way to protect yourself and your community. Jack's victory was a hard-fought one, but it ultimately showed that justice, when pursued with determination and integrity, will always prevail. If you enjoyed this story and the satisfying end to Karen's reign, don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends and neighbors. Let's spread the message that no one should be allowed to abuse their power without consequences. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. Have you ever had a neighbor who pushed you too far? Share your story in the comments below. We'd love to hear about your experiences. Together, we can all stand up for what's right and make sure justice is always served. Stay tuned for more, and remember, when you stand up for yourself, you're not just fighting for you, you're fighting for everyone around you.